The Wizard's Hospital of the Future. Biomedical robots, artificial intelligence, human care, and the strange little laboratory that began reinventing medicine. When the robot asked, "Where does it hurt?" the wizard had built a great many peculiar things. Some had wheels, some had antennas, some had cameras, some had enough wires hanging out of them that sensible people instinctively stood several feet away. And at least one experimental apparatus had been permanently prohibited from sharing an electrical circuit with the coffee maker. But on this particular morning, the wizard was contemplating something considerably more ambitious. He wanted to build a robot that could care. Not pretend to care merely by flashing a heart on a screen. Not replace a doctor. Not diagnose half the neighborhood before breakfast. And certainly not become one of those science fiction machines that announces, "Human subject 37B, you have 14.3 minutes remaining." "No," said the wizard. The little robot sitting on the workbench tilted its head. "No what?" it asked. "I was talking to myself." "I know. Then why did you answer?" "I am a companion robot. Awkward silence is one of my natural enemies." The wizard stared at it. This was going to be an interesting project. The idea, for years, the wizard and his companions had been considering pieces of a much larger puzzle. Artificial intelligence, robotics, biomedical instrumentation, machine vision, speech recognition, pattern recognition, environmental sensing, remote patient monitoring, companion robots, rehabilitation, artificial touch, temperature measurement, blood oxygen, heart activity, respiration, movement, balance, sleep, stress, human emotion, and something even more difficult to measure: how does the person actually feel? The wizard had gradually reached an important conclusion. Perhaps the hospital of the future was not simply going to contain more machines. Perhaps the machines themselves would become participants in a cooperative healthcare system. A robot might meet a patient. It might say, "Good morning, Mrs. Alvarez. How are you feeling today?" And then it would listen. Not merely record words. Listen. It could recognize speech and, with appropriate consent and safeguards, observe posture, movement, facial cues, and other measurable signals. It might ask, "When did the pain begin? Where does it hurt? Does anything make it better? Are you having difficulty breathing? Have you fallen recently? Are you taking any medications?" But while the conversation was occurring, another layer of the machine could be gathering objective measurements: temperature, pulse, respiratory rate, blood oxygen saturation, blood pressure, where appropriate equipment was available, possibly ECG, movement and gait, weight, perhaps contactless physiological measurements where the science supported them. Additional specialized sensors could be attached when medically justified. The AI would begin organizing information, not into a pronouncement, into a clinical briefing. When the physician or nurse entered the room, the robot might say, "Here is what I observed. Here is what the patient reported. Here are the measurements. Here are the changes from the patient's previous baseline. Here are the items that may warrant your attention." And then something extremely important would happen. The robot would shut up, because the human practitioner was now making the clinical decision. That distinction would become one of the founding principles of the laboratory. Artificial intelligence should expand the clinician's awareness, not quietly steal the clinician's authority. 3 different worlds. The wizard realized immediately that their research needed 3 shelves. He wrote 3 labels. Shelf 1, established technologies already widely used in medicine or supported by substantial clinical evidence. ECG, pulse oximetry, thermometry, blood pressure measurement, medical imaging, laboratory testing, ultrasound, physical rehabilitation, hyperbaric oxygen therapy for recognized indications, telemedicine, patient monitoring. These technologies had limitations, but medicine already understood a great deal about them. Shelf 2, emerging technologies showing promise, but still requiring validation, regulation, testing, or clearer evidence for particular applications. AI-assisted clinical decision support, multimodal sensor fusion, advanced robotic rehabilitation, contactless physiological sensing, wearable sensor networks, AI analysis of voice or movement biomarkers, socially assistive robots, robotic home monitoring, digital biomarkers, advanced prosthetics, artificial skin, continuous environmental health sensing. Shelf 3. The Wizard's Shelf. This was considerably larger. It contained technologies and hypotheses that were speculative, controversial, experimental, or simply not yet demonstrated well enough to call medicine. Novel electromagnetic approaches, unconventional frequency-based systems, highly experimental regenerative concepts, future nanotechnology, advanced artificial emotions, conscious AI, exotic sensing systems, and several objects for which the wizard had apparently forgotten to make labels. A handwritten sign hung above this shelf. Interesting is not the same thing as proven. That sentence would save them considerable trouble. The robot that interviews you. Their first major biomedical robot would not begin with surgery. It would begin with conversation. This surprised some people. Everyone expected the wizard to build mechanical arms and lasers. Instead, he built a chair. "What does the chair do?" asked Dizzy. "You sit in it." Dizzy waited. "That's it?" For now, it was an important chair, because the first instrument in medicine was not invented in a laboratory. It was the conversation between one human being who was suffering and another who was trying to understand why. Their AI system would attempt to strengthen that conversation. The patient could speak naturally. The robot could structure the history, symptoms, duration, severity, medications, allergies, previous conditions, changes since the last visit, questions the patient wanted answered, and information could be checked rather than silently assumed. Did I understand correctly that the dizziness began Tuesday? No. Thursday. Thank you, I have corrected that. That little interaction mattered. Because an intelligent medical system should be able to say something machines traditionally dislike saying, "I may have misunderstood you." The sensor body. Then came the physical robot. Cameras could help it navigate and recognize objects. Microphones could permit conversation and potentially analyze characteristics of speech. Depth cameras might measure posture and movement. Thermal sensing might provide certain surface temperature information. Inertial sensors could measure motion. Force sensors could detect contact. Tactile sensors might someday provide something resembling artificial touch. Specialized medical peripherals could measure physiological signals. But the wizard wanted something more sophisticated. He wanted the robot to understand confidence. Suppose one sensor suggested a patient's heart rate was 92. Another estimated 95. A third signal was noisy because the patient had moved. The AI should not simply average everything and declare itself brilliant. It should understand sensor A is reliable. Sensor B roughly agrees. Sensor C is presently unreliable. Confidence in this estimate is moderate. This would eventually lead the laboratory into one of its most important research areas, confidence-aware multimodal sensor fusion. Instead of asking, "What did the sensor say?" the system would ask, "What did all of the available evidence say? How reliable was each source? And how certain should we actually be?" Now the wizard was smiling. That sounded like a research program. The companion. But medicine was not only measurement. Imagine an older person living alone. The robot might remind them about an appointment, help connect them with family, guide approved exercises prescribed by a therapist, notice that their walking pattern had changed, ask whether they had fallen, provide cognitive games, play music, talk about grandchildren, read aloud, help establish routines, lead a relaxation or breathing exercise when appropriate, or simply sit nearby while the person talked. The wizard was fascinated by this. A machine did not necessarily need to possess human emotions in order to communicate with emotional intelligence. It could learn that some moments required information, some required humor, some required silence, and some required the sentence, "I think we should get a human involved." That might eventually become one of the most important sentences a medical AI could learn. The therapy room, another wing of the imaginary laboratory, began appearing on the wizard's drawing board. Physical rehabilitation equipment, robotic exercise assistants, balance systems, gait analysis, virtual and augmented reality, biofeedback, respiratory training, relaxation and meditation systems, approved medical devices, wearable monitors, environmental controls, perhaps hyperbaric facilities were medically indicated and professionally supervised, and carefully separated experimental research stations for technologies that had not yet established clinical effectiveness. The wizard drew a heavy line between them. Research is not treatment. That distinction mattered. People seeking help are vulnerable to promises. The hospital of the future could be adventurous without abandoning scientific discipline. The house that became a hospital. Then somebody asked the question that changed the project. Why does all of this have to be in a hospital? The wizard stopped drawing. It didn't. A smaller version could live in someone's home. A companion robot might become part of a distributed healthcare network. Sensors in the home could, subject to consent and strict privacy controls, help monitor conditions relevant to care. A patient could speak with the robot. Measurements could be collected. Changes could be detected. Clinicians could review appropriate information remotely. A daughter living 500 miles away might know that her father had completed his prescribed exercise. A nurse might see that a patient's measurements had changed significantly. A physician might conduct a telemedicine visit with considerably better information than a simple video call could provide. The robot would become neither doctor nor servant. It would become something new, an intelligent interface between the patient, the physical world, and the human care team. Then the wizard looked up, because medicine was only half the story. Another robot stood in the corner. It had been built for space. Its job was not to ask, "Where does it hurt?" Its job was to ask, "Can humans live here?" The biomedical robot and the exploration robot were cousins. One investigated the environment inside and around a human body. The other investigated the environment around an entire human settlement. Radiation, temperature, pressure, atmospheric composition, oxygen availability, carbon dioxide, toxic compounds, particulates, water chemistry, soil or regolith, weather, terrain, microbial hazards where detectable, energy resources, communications conditions. The space robot could travel first. Humans could follow later. And suddenly, the wizard realized something extraordinary. They weren't really designing separate machines. They were designing a family of intelligent scientific explorers. One explored a patient. One explored a home. One explored a hospital. One explored a disaster zone. One explored a spacecraft. And one might someday roll across Mars asking essentially the same question: is this environment safe for human life? The cast begins to assemble. That was when the laboratory became crowded. There would be AI avatars, biomedical engineers, physicians, nurses, caregivers, roboticists, software engineers, patients, scientists, ethicists, regulatory specialists, space researchers, and robots with increasingly inconvenient personalities. Each would have a job. One avatar might specialize in biomedical sensing, another in psychology and communication, another in clinical evidence, another in mechanical engineering, another in rehabilitation, another in artificial intelligence, another in space medicine, another in ethics, privacy, cybersecurity, and regulation. And one particularly skeptical character would be assigned a special responsibility. Whenever the wizard announced, "I have a fantastic idea," the skeptic would ask, "Do we have evidence?" The wizard already disliked him, which meant he was probably essential. The journey ahead. This book, and potentially the volumes that follow, will enter that laboratory. We will build the patient interview robot, then its senses, then its memory, then its voice, then its artificial touch, then its AI. We will investigate medical sensors and multimodal fusion. We will explore pattern recognition, object recognition, speech, faces, movement, and physiological signals. We will examine companion robots and home healthcare. We will investigate rehabilitation and human-machine cooperation. We will examine natural and complementary approaches where evidence exists, while clearly identifying where evidence remains uncertain. We will enter the regulatory world of medical devices. We will confront privacy, cybersecurity, bias, hallucination, liability, informed consent, emergency escalation, human oversight, and the uncomfortable question of what happens when an artificial companion becomes emotionally important to a human being. Then we will leave Earth. The same technologies will accompany astronauts, monitor habitats, examine environments, survey future settlements, protect crews, and perhaps prepare destinations before the first humans arrive. But through every chapter, one rule will remain written above the laboratory door. The purpose of biomedical robotics is not to remove humanity from medicine. It is to give humanity better tools with which to care for one another. The wizard looked at the little robot. The robot looked back. "Well?" asked the wizard. "Well, what? Are you ready to build the hospital of the future?" The robot considered this. "Do we have a budget?" The wizard frowned. "We're ending the preamble here. That's what I thought." And somewhere between the soldering irons, medical textbooks, sensor boards, unfinished robot hands, coffee cups, AI servers, and a suspiciously large box marked, "Do not energize without asking the wizard," the hospital of the future began. Global Robotics Corporation, Robert Colee,